Good morning, everyone. Prior learning assessment and recognition, or the recognition of prior learning as it is popularly called, has increasingly become the focus of skills development policy in a number of countries. As countries seek to ensure that they offer more flexible, inclusive, and an efficient route for persons to obtain skills, training, higher education, and improved job opportunities. Successful implementation of any PLAR program means that there must be a strong, supportive regulatory environment, clear communication of its benefits to stakeholders, a strong collaborative approach, flexible delivery, and of course, a robust quality assurance system. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission has advanced work for the implementation of PLAR Standards and Guidelines within the higher education and training sector. To support its implementation, the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission will be engaging in a series of capacity building sessions throughout this year. The theme for this event is PLAR, Reflections on Best Practices and Innovative Solutions. And this is part one of a two-part series. Welcome. We know that you are watching on JTEC TV. We are welcoming all our stakeholders across our Government of Jamaica ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as higher education and training institutions, employers, members of the quality assurance community. And a special invitation is extended to all PLAR practitioners in our higher education and training institutions. This symposium will focus on the following areas today. We'll be looking at lessons learned implementing PLAR programs regionally. We'll also be looking on reflections and best practices and innovative ideas locally, as well as benefits of PLAR to higher education institutions, organizations, and students. And our goals today are to generate ideas for the implementations of solutions to support PLAR, to provide regional and local best practices that are culturally sensitive, and to explore the importance, the benefits, and the strategies to increase buy-in and awareness among stakeholders. Thank you once again for tuning in. I am Norda Seymour Hall, Director of International Relations and Qualifications here at JTEC, and I'll be hosting you today. First, I want to start by introducing to you JTEC's program, what it is that is to guide the institutions in order to ensure that they're implementing appropriately. I'll be giving you a brief synopsis of our standards and guidelines. Now, we know that PLAR is a process that involves the identification, the documentation, as well as the assessment and recognition of the learning that one has acquired. We know that experiential learning can occur just about anywhere. And we also know that in order for us to successfully implement the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, then we must integrate PLAR. It is critical because it is the NQFJ that allows us to articulate skill levels in a meaningful way. And an established framework of credit qualifications or occupational standards is a key precondition to the successful introduction of PLAR. And we know that society values both a balance of credentials and experience. And so it is critical that the needs of stakeholders is met. Now, when we developed our PLAR standards and guidelines, there are some international core values that were central to the policy development. Equity, inclusion, access, flexibility, openness, all of those were core guiding values. And those are, of course, in line with UNESCO's recommendation. And as we developed the principles, these were the guiding principles that we looked at: a learner-centered approach, collaboration, accessibility, flexibility, reliability, clarity, quality, competency, and knowledge, as well as parity of esteem. Now, the purpose of the PLAR standards and guidelines are to guide institutions on how to prepare, plan, and implement PLAR, as well as to inform prospective candidates on what they can expect and how they can actively participate. Now, in terms of scope, the standards and guidelines that will be rolled out in this financial year in all higher education institutions are applicable to all that offer national qualifications in Jamaica. The standards and guidelines establishes the core values and guiding principles for PLAR development within institutions. They also outline the process involved in PLAR assessment. They detail the key standards and indicators for PLAR policy implementation, and they provide practical guidelines for assessment. And we know the benefits already. Basically, when PLAR is used, it is far easier for us to validate learning through life experience, for us to inculcate self-confidence, for us to identify areas that need further studies. And of course, it can potentially aid in career development and reduce the cost of education because of the shortened program duration. Now, Standard 1 in the PLAR standards looks at equity, accessibility, and transparency. Standard 2 looks at assessment and credit awards, and Standard 3, administration. And the implementation process is defined in relation to accessibility, recognition of learning, equity, efficiency, and transparency. PLAR credits are awarded by institutions according to set criteria, including qualification level. That is a must. And for administration, the policies, procedures, and personnel must be in place at each institution to ensure PLAR program is fit for purpose. And of course, each institution must look at the services they offered, ensure they have entry requirements, ensure that they consider the attendance and delivery modes, that there are internal quality assurance process and provisions, and there is a body internally responsible for quality assurance. And of course, best practices must be considered. JTEC's role is to ensure that PLAR providers are registered and that they provide support and guidance to PLAR. They monitor PLAR providers, or we monitor PLAR providers. We develop the standards and guidelines, which will be rolled out this year. And we conduct research on various aspects of PLAR in order to support the development and implementation by institutions. It is also our role to ensure that we maintain a database of all institutions that offer PLAR, that we provide information to persons that are seeking to benefit from flexible learning pathways, and that we facilitate the networking and mutual learning of best practices for PLAR among institutions, and that we make policy recommendations for sustainable funding of PLAR. We also ensure that quality assurance and assessment processes are established and they are effective. Now, the role of employers is to ensure that they have workplace guidelines and that they align their HR policies to accommodate PLAR, and that, of course, all the human resource development and in-service training standards are aligned to the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. And we will be working with employers to ensure that this is done. Employers are also required to ensure that training suppliers are accredited when they are sending their employees to benefit from the programs that they offer. And of course, to provide feedback on competency gaps to the system and to contribute to the development of occupational standards. Institutions will be implementing PLAR standards and guidelines through policy development, and they will be complying with quality assurance and audit requirements. They'll ensure that their institutions are registered and their programs are accredited. They will ensure that they are compliant with the NQFJ standards for assessing and placement of qualifications. And they'll, of course, ensure that they provide sound administrative processes to beneficiaries, as well as that should include an appeals process. Now, a critical part of ensuring that this works is to support institutions through training and development. And that, of course, is being rolled out as well. And this is critical so that the benefits of PLAR can be understood by all higher education institutions, and that they have a clear understanding of what their role is, and that they're able to utilize established standards and guidelines and demonstrate proper procedures. Thank you so much for listening. At this time, I'm going to introduce the first speaker to you. Now, Miss Azra, so I'm so sorry, I have the wrong person there. I'm going to be introducing at this time Professor Charmaine Barrett. She's our first speaker. She hails from the University of Technology. Dr. Charmaine Barrett is Professor of Adult Education and Workforce Development at the University of Technology, Jamaica. She holds a PhD in Work and Human Resource Education. Her major and her point of study has been focused on adult education. She's from the University of Minnesota, USA, where she had a master's in adult education from the Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Canada as well. I had that a little mixed up. She's currently Dean of the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies at the University of Technology. Her research interests include adult teaching and learning, online teaching and learning, workforce education, STEM and TVET education, and teacher professional development. Having met Professor Charmaine Barrett, I must say she is passionate about PLAR. And Professor Barrett, we look forward to learning more from you as we seek to ensure that we are on a path to greatness in Jamaica. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And you will be speaking on the topic, PLAR, an imperative for achieving sustainable development, framework, and practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you are hearing me. And it is a pleasure to be invited to be part of this panel this morning. Allow me to be able to ensure that all that I need is available. I will be using a PowerPoint presentation to help me to go through. Thank you so much. Here it is. So I can now jump right in. So thank you so much for that introduction. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And as you were told, I'll be speaking on the topic PLAR, an imperative for achieving sustainable development. And I'll be looking at it within the context of the framework and practices. This is absolutely important at this time. And I want to just say, I have decided to engage with this matter of the PLAR at the level of the framework and fitting it within the window of sustainable development, because I really, not because I don't think we are aware, but I want to keep us in that, looking at that greater outcome. I find sometimes being in the system myself, we get so bogged down with the day-to-day running and of the process. And sometimes persons come into the process without an understanding of why we are doing what we are doing. And so it becomes an activity rather than a strategic action towards a greater goal. And so my presentation, I hope, will help to give us focus in that regard. So I have put as some guiding principles which relate to what Mrs. Hall just shared, because of course we are talking about PLAR, and so the principles remain. But I want to pull us to the point of sustainable development and to talk about one of the principles here is sustainable development, and that is because our government, like other governments, have signed into the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And I want to say that critical to the Sustainable Development Agenda is education. It is not possible to accomplish the Sustainable Development Agenda without education. And I dare say, critical to that process is the education of adults. And so PLAR, I think, is critical to that process. So as we look at sustainable development, we must put education at the center, and that takes us to the importance of PLAR. Another principle that I'm grounding my presentation in is the principle of lifelong learning. You are not seeing the learning for some reason, but lifelong learning. And what is that? We all know of the phrase womb to the tomb. And so everybody has that. But what does it mean? From the perspective of PLAR and its connection with higher ed, it's important to identify that lifelong learning speaks about an acceptance, an acknowledgement and an acceptance that learning takes place outside of the classroom. Lifelong learning involves the acceptance that there is formal learning, there is non-formal learning, and there is informal learning. And by formal learning, we are talking about learning that takes place in accredited, acknowledged educational institutions. Non-formal, that which distinguishes non-formal from formal, is simply the fact that one takes place outside of this formal accredited educational institution. But all the other factors are there, and that's important for this presentation, that we recognize that in the non-formal, all the other factors of being organized, having established goals and objectives, having ways of assessing that learning has taken place, which are critical to the formal. But what is missing is that element of credentialing. That is absent. However, it is important to note that many, particularly within our Jamaican context, that is rich in its community development agenda and activities for many years now, the matter of the non-formal becomes critical to our efforts to engage adults through PLAR. So I want to put that very, very clearly within the context of what we are sharing about. Then we have the National Qualifications Framework, which really speaks about a mechanism that is established or an instrument, if you please, for the development and classification of qualifications according to a set of criteria established by a given country. So, and the qualification framework establishes a basis for improving the quality, credibility, the accessibility, and the linkages and between different levels of the education system. And so it's both horizontal and vertical. And right within that, PLAR has to play a critical role. Then we have the principle of alternative pathways. And alternative pathway assumes that there was an established pathway. And in Jamaica, we know the established pathway is generally 5 CXC subjects, including math and English for the most part, and then or A-level qualifications. And flexible pathway. And so in response to that, alternative pathway says, how else can persons access higher education, access things that are happening, access to other levels of education, access to other levels of qualification, access to other kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities that are available in higher education or in colleges and universities. And so that's what alternative pathways is about, looking at other ways of accessing education. That leads us into flexible learning pathways. And that really is about what universities or colleges or post-secondary institutions do in order to create these alternative pathways. And this is the other principle here is getting some more popularity within our Jamaican context, and that's the matter of micro-credentials. And this really just speaks to short, verified courses or learning experiences. And very often that is certified through some digital certification. So you will hear another phrase, digital badging, being used in relation to that. So these are some of the principles. Now here we have a slide which captures the essence of my presentation to you. And it says, the goal is sustainable development. The large outcome is sustainable development. And you know that the sustainable development speaks to matters related to the social well-being of a country, the economic well-being, and environmental well-being of the country. And so what we are saying here is that P.L.A.R is critical, is an imperative for us to achieve those sustainable development goals that we have articulated. And I'll just name a few. About education for all, equal access to education. And we'll look a little there. It's about persons having access and the capacity to obtain not just work, but decent work. It's about healthy environment. All of those things it speaks about health. All of those 17 goals must be engaged at the education level. So it's passing on information. It's giving skills and competencies, whichever one we want to look at, give gender access to education and gender well-being. All of that goes right back to education. And so my argument and the premise of my presentation is that we cannot in Jamaica speak about attaining the sustainable development goals, which PIOJ, rightly so, likes to boast about how the alignment between our National Development 2030 plan and the Sustainable Development Goals. We cannot say that that is not so if we are, I want to go back to this slide for a little, if we have not embraced a system of prior learning assessment and recognition. But if you look at the bottom, you will see that I have PLAR Spectrum. And so the argument here is that PLAR acknowledges prior learning, but the real impact on sustainable development will occur when we move along this spectrum from one that is more based on formal education to one that moves towards more and more accepting non-formal learning and even informal learning as valid ways of learning that are acknowledged as ways that institutions, post-secondary institutions, can incorporate in their PLAR strategy. So as we move along the spectrum, we move from a dependence or reliance within our PLAR system on formal education to non-formal and even more so to the informal. Let's look in a little more detail on what this means. And I want to pull out the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which says that it aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And under this goal, it's broken down into 7 target areas. And I'm going to just focus on target 4.3 and 4.4. 4.3 speaks about ensuring equal access. Equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality education, quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. If we are to ensure access, equal access, then we must establish alternative pathways, because we would be acknowledging that the existing or the traditional pathway, the dominant, the most used pathway, targets young people who are leaving school with their 5 CXCs and adults who might not be equipped with their 5 CXCs but have other experiential learning experiences need to be captured in order to ensure that there's equal access for all. Target 4.4 goes further, and it says to substantially increase the number of youths and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment and to engage in entrepreneurship. And so this is what we are contending with: equal access for all, and to ensure that there is increase in the number of persons. It's not just about the number of persons with a degree, but the numbers of persons who are qualified with the skills and the competencies to be able to gain good employment or to start their own businesses, to be able to take care of themselves and their families in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And so if this is our target, sustainable development, and particularly this goal 4, then I believe there are some preconditions. The first is that we must reduce the barriers. And the Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.3 speaks to this. We must reduce those barriers starting from even the secondary level. But barriers to the post-secondary is absolutely important. We must ensure that there is equitable access. And that is where PLAR fits in. We must also ensure that there is increased and diversified learning opportunities. Increased and diversified. So for there to be increased learning opportunities, there must be increased ways for which persons are able to access those opportunities. And the fourth precondition, I call them, is the development of high-level cognitive and non-cognitive transferable skills. Now, those of us in education and in post-secondary and higher education will know that we always speak about the role, one of the the values of higher education is higher education's contribution to the development of high-level cognitive skills. And so the assumption there is that when we engage at the college level, university levels, we are better able to function at particular levels in the workplace. We are better able to engage with critical thinking, depth of analysis, being able to synthesize, to make decisions, to problem solve. And we know that the people vary across a spectrum in terms of their levels of ability and capability to function in these areas. But we also know that education helps us to develop these skills and competencies. And so if we are targeting a well-qualified population who are able to compete regionally and internationally, then this is the kind of person we want broadly. And so so access must be given to persons to be able to engage at that level. And so as you would have heard all throughout my presentation, that I'm arguing for PLAR from this perspective. So I'm saying PLAR must be seen as more than an instrument or a tool or an approach to increase our student numbers within our higher education institutions. It has to have a more social good than just the economic benefits at the universities or the community colleges or colleges. So PLAR calls for the provision and recognition of formal, non-formal, and informal learning. And it must acknowledge the links between formal, non-formal structures. The literature shows that not just in UTEC, in the universities here within the Jamaican context, but that internationally, universities are so tied to the traditional ways of engaging students that there is still resistance to PLAR. Despite what we are, so many persons, despite institutions, individual institutions moving in that direction, it's having trouble, especially as we move towards the non-formal engagement. For this to happen, institutions of higher learning must elevate the value of learning that takes place outside the boundaries of the formal classroom. Educators like myself, academic administrators like myself, have got to value learning outside the formal environment. And so it must be grounded in the recognition, the validation, and the accreditation of knowledge, skills, competencies that are acquired through non-formal and informal education. And so I ask us on the platform this morning, from our various agencies, where are we in terms of our recognition, the validation, and the accreditation of the skills, the competencies, and the knowledge that our adults come to the table with? And I'm not even talking about the processes that we have established yet, just the mental shift that needs to take place. With this in mind, then, a critical aspect of embracing PLAR would be to embrace the notion of flexible learning pathways. And in my next slide, we will talk about those flexible learning pathways and how we are responding to it as higher education institutions. But it also speaks about us embracing the notion of flexible, not just flexible learning pathways, but these alternative ways of engaging our students, not just for access, but for progression throughout the learning experience. Very important. And so here we are. The diagram is not looking like I had put it, but I guess you can all see it. The spectrum says, and I dare say that this is where we are housed for the most part. Many of our PLAR policies or practices within our post-secondary institutions, I believe, when I look at those that I had access to, for the most part, we have engagements between formal institutions. So one that would offer a certificate in something, or an associate degree, or some other kind of formal certification. Those form a package of the kinds of experiences and learning that are accepted by higher institutions, higher education institutions. So this is the crux of where we are just now, formal to formal. There are few instances, and like at UTEC where I am, I believe this relates more at the graduate level, few instances where there is a link between formal institutions and the workplace. That is, formal institutions accepting workplace experience as indicators of learning that it would be acceptable to gain access within programs of higher learning. But this is minuscule. A lot more work needs to be done in this area. And I know critical to this would be the methods of validation, the methods of verification of learning, and therefore the accreditation of those learning experiences. So I'm aware that that's a challenge. So for JTEC, there is much to be done in helping to set the framework that would facilitate an expanded acceptance of workplace experiential learning as a part of the tools in the arsenal of the PLAR unit that at institutions of higher learning. Now, this other, you notice we are talking about the spectrum, PLAR spectrum, going from the formal to the non-formal to the informal, and we're not even going to informal, the non-formal as it relates to workplace, and now non-formal still as it relates to civil society organizations. So I'm not going to load us with informal because that's a whole nother ball game. But we will stay at the non-formal as it relates to civil society organizations. I think I referenced it, I referred to it earlier in my presentation, but I want to say to you who are listening to me, to remind us that Jamaica has an absolutely rich history of community development. And accompanying that community development is a rich history of training that happens in our community development programs. I have had the opportunity of working for 5 years in an NGO with responsibility for training and developing communities in leadership skills, fundraising, strategic planning. These are and I'm only speaking of my experience, but I also worked in a context where I was aware of all the trainings that were taking place, all the opportunities for persons to engage in training, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, intensive training funded by national, bilateral, and multilateral agencies, in which people are given certificates of participations, certificate of completion, in which the programs were highly structured, established objectives, learning content outlined, assessment methods outlined. And I have had experience of persons accessing other levels of education outside of Jamaica using these learning experiences. And that's my biggest challenge to us this morning. As we are reflecting on best practices, I want to challenge us to engage with what are the kinds of things that we need to think about to be able to take us in this direction. And I come to my final slide. For this to happen, we must have the proper enabling environment. And Mrs. Seymour Hall, in her introductory statement, spoke to some of these. So we are aware that things have been happening and a lot has been happening. The first thing I have highlighted here as a part of the enabling environment is the need to establish a flexible pathway framework. That's what I call it. So I put the flexible pathway framework as the umbrella. And under that flows national and institutional level issues that we need to address. So, for example, the country needs to have a lifelong learning policy. This is in the making for many years, in excess of 10 years. And as far as I'm aware, this policy is still in draft. But a lifelong learning policy would establish the acceptance of learning outside the formal context as being important within the learning and education ecosystem. Having said that, a national qualifications framework accompanying this policy is important. We have gone ahead and I made sure to put the framework, the diagram of the framework here to show that I'm aware that we have established that. And you will not be able to see, I'm not sure from the side, the fact that we have the P.L.A.R. represented on the qualification framework. But that is important. And maybe sidebar, we could call it a sidebar, that a report or research done by Hale and Barrett suggests that the framework is not being used by higher education institutions. And might I just use this, put a plug here to say, based on my experience, part of the challenge we are having here is how do we use it? We were trying to, and still have, we have moved ahead to try to dig into it. Yes, it's there. And we see that, level 8 would mean this across that. Level 5, level 4, CVQ might speak to occupational accreditation and it speaks to associate degree, or a level 5 would speak to a bachelor's degree, and a CVQ 5. But when that person comes to the institution of higher education and they are to now assess, how do you know there are challenges in being able to assess what is before us? So that's something that we have to look into if we are to truly have a flexible framework. Now, tied to this qualifications framework is the pathways. And that's part of the trouble I'm saying, to be able to understand the pathways. Very important. And then I have here micro-credentials and digital badging. And I'm so pleased to see that JTEC and UCJ is acknowledging, is validating, and even accrediting micro-credentials as a tool for access. And that goes in line with the next point, which is a policy for credit accumulation or credit banking, that as we engage people with micro-credentials, then there needs to be policies within our higher education institutions that allows persons to bank these micro-credentials to lead towards a credit, a whole module with 3 credits, and others. So those are some of the things that we have to engage with. And then the availability of resources. And I know that being in this context, that a big thing that is not on my slide, which should be there, is the matter of monitoring and evaluation. That is important. But the system of verification and accreditation becomes very important. In about 2009, UNESCO established a system of I saw a thing in the chat, so I hesitated because of that. The system of an RVA, a method of validating non-formal learning, a method for recognizing, validating, and accrediting non-formal learning. So that's RVA. And so that system, that's because at the time when we were discussing the P.L.A.R framework for action, which guided what was happening with all of the practices in adult education, which the government of Jamaica signed on to, PIOJ said they weren't able to assess and collect data on non-formal, but they're able because there was no way of validating. And at that time, UNESCO representative was proud to tell us that they were coming up with this, and subsequently we got it, a method to recognize, validate, and accredit non-formal learning. So I'm saying to you, JTEC and other members of the audience, that work is being done to facilitate us getting to this. We have examples from South Africa, from Australia, from New Zealand, other the UK, who have those countries that have gone ahead to expand their PLAR framework to include the non-formal in real ways. Of course, it's untidy. Of course, it has challenges. But if we want to say that we are moving towards accomplishing the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to contend with the non-formal messiness and try to make sense out of it. And the final point I have there is going to be the role of counseling and guidance, both for workplace and for individuals who need help in understanding how not just their experiences, but the learning they have attained from those experiences can be canonized and packaged in a way that makes it accessible to institutions of learning. So, ladies and gentlemen, for me, I am teasing out and interrogating best practices at the level of the framework, at the ecosystems, at the highest level. What best practices what should we entail? What should our best practice entail if we are truly embracing a PLAR, a flexible learning, a sustainable development, alternative pathway agenda in Jamaica? I hope this will contribute to the discussion this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Barrett. Wow, what a presentation. So we've learned about the important aspects that are needed for a proper PLAR system. You spoke about sustainable development, alternative pathways, lifelong learning, of course, ensuring that the national qualifications framework is fully implemented and operational in all institutions, micro-credentials, flexible learning pathways. And we've been challenged today to really examine our practices. And you've also highlighted some of the fears that institutions have. And I'm seeing some questions from our viewers. One person asked, what is digital badging? You spoke about digital badging. What does all this mean? Do you want to comment on that, Professor Barrett?
I will comment as far as I would say that it is one of the ways, let's put it that way, one of the ways of verifying and recognizing training in short-term training. And that short-term training is called micro-credentialing. And that it is acknowledging the influence of technology in all of what we do. So micro-badging is a technological, I should say a digital way of demonstrating, or should I say verifying, that training has been completed at a level that's acceptable by an institution or by an entity. That's how I would do it.
Thank you so much for that. And another question, comment here is that there must be a strong relationship between industry requirements and academic programs in order to facilitate industry validation. And I know that validates one of the points that you raised. Do you want to comment any further on that?
It is that for that reason why when you look in, for example, in Canada, they were contending with the issue that higher education institutions were slow, continued to be a little tardy, a little wary of going the PLAR, because traditionally the way we develop our courses of study in higher education, especially in universities, is not about industry standards. It's about expected knowledge and competencies that should be learned based on the area of learning. So we start from what is established as the traditional knowledge, skills, and abilities that students should learn if they are doing this particular course, as opposed to the approach that says, we are saying, what does industry need? Let's design our programs for industry. And some persons are against that, because they say it places an economic perspective to education. It limits education to the economic capitalist paradigm. And so that's part of the trouble that we are having. But if we are to have this relationship, and so you would find that community colleges and other colleges, other entities, post-secondary institutions that are more professionalizing entities or geared to industry training are more prone to engaging and accepting a PLAR system that acknowledges prior learning from the workplace. And it goes right back to our traditions as institutions of learning.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing well done from Sinandra Monte. And of course, I'm seeing well done as well from Trenchtown Polytechnic College, and also the Jamaica Diaspora Education Task Force, tertiary sector. They are saying, thank you, Dr. Barrett, for this insightful and knowledge-filled presentation. And so we thank you very much. And
Appreciate.
just a quick point on something else that you raised. You spoke about the matter that the pathways must be clear and institutions must be able, when they are assessing persons, to understand the flexible pathways and the relationships between the pathways across sectors and across levels. Now, in one of the things that I must congratulate some of our institutions for doing, just this year, we have started to populate the Qualifications Registry of Jamaica website. The University of Technology, the University of the West Indies, Northern Caribbean University, those are just some of the major universities in Jamaica that have agreed to have their qualifications listed on this website based on levels in the national qualifications framework. And of course, we know that once this system is populated, it will be a game changer to really allow persons to understand the equivalencies across sectors and so on. And so we thank you so much. And of course, I'll just take a few more comments before we move on. Verica Bennett says, enlightening discussion. I particularly like the reference to post-secondary education. And Diane Irvin is saying, in healthcare, our company has adopted this model of externally validating competencies based on short courses, which focus on specific competencies and in a particular sector with success. So thank you for that comment, Diane Irvin, and thank you, Verica Bennett. Brian Wallace says, well done. At this time, I'm going to invite Mr. Dwight Johnson. He is a member of the International Relations and Qualifications Division here at JTEC, and he's going to be introducing our next speaker. Thank you once again, Professor Barrett. And of course, at the end of all these presentations, we're going to have a short roundtable talk with all our speakers. Thank you once again. Okay, is Mr. Johnson here? Okay. All right. Mr. Johnson is having some technical difficulties, so I'll go ahead. So our next speaker, Ms. Azra Nathud Khan, and I hope I got that right. She is going to be speaking to us on implementing PLAR within the Caribbean, lessons learned on cultural significance and stakeholder engagement. Now, this is a topic that I'm really looking forward to. She is the Executive Director of Sea First Online Academy Limited and Caribbean Director for Eduqual UK. She is based in Trinidad and Tobago as well as Barbados. She has worked in higher education, specializing in vocational training for over 20 years. She has also worked as a sector development specialist at the National Training Agency of Trinidad and Tobago, creating and implementing national occupational standards for various sectors in Trinidad and Tobago, mainly hospitality and the energy sector. She was also a director at the Metal Industries Technical Institute in Trinidad and Tobago. She has also created and customized award programs that have been deployed across the Caribbean, working in both private and public sector organizations such as the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Fifth Summit in the Americas, and the Princess Juliana International Airport in St. Martin. She has a keen eye on the enormity of stakeholder engagement in the education and training realm. Thank you so much for presenting today. I'll now turn over to you, Azra Nathud Khan.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just do some housekeeping here. Is everyone hearing me?
Yes, we're all hearing you clearly.
Perfect. Ms. Hall, are my slides up? Not sure. Just doing a bit of housekeeping here. Even before the housekeeping, my professor who preceded me, excellent presentation, and thank you for all of that. In fact, I think what she touched on is exactly, well, it's in tune with what I'm touching on as well. So once everyone is hearing me, I'm okay. I'm just wondering, Dwight or Noda, could we get these slides up or? Okay, great. Good. We can leave that one in for now. So my name is Azra. As Ms. Hall introduced me, I am the director of Seafirst Online Academy. And before that, I still am the director of Customer First Caribbean. I call myself a Caribbean citizen because I've worked basically in most of the islands in the Caribbean. I have a deep and great passion for the Caribbean as a diaspora. And I'm hopeful that what I speak of today will lend some more perspective and add value to what we are doing in the diaspora as educators, etc. So we've been talking a lot about the new normal in the Caribbean and the world with COVID-19. And whilst we would have to talk about COVID-19, yes, I'm going to talk about it in terms of what has happened, in terms of the people we have dealt with, and in terms of the way going forward. COVID-19 catapulted us in many ways in the Caribbean, more ways than one. It's an economic shift we have never seen before. Industries were decimated, such as the tourism industry, etc. And we were placed full front into a different paradigm. What happened with education and training? And I will touch on that in a little bit. Could we go to the next slide, please? Or would I be able to show okay, good. So as you all know, people are always learning everywhere and throughout the course of their lives. More so, what we saw in the Caribbean is that people had to upskill at a rapid rate, more so because some of them would have lost jobs, etc. So we had to shift gears as a company and as the director of EduQual in the Caribbean. I had to shift gears, not just with my own learners and the people coming into my company, but also with the centers that I've dealt with. And I'm going to give you examples as we go along. So we had COVID-19 locking down countries all over the Caribbean. People were at home. People were basically surviving. People who were surviving before were now even more hard-pressed to survive under more enormous hardship that COVID-19 gave to us. Now, what did that mean for, let's say, someone who was doing a hairdressing course at a center? It meant, one, that there was less money to pay for her course. Two, how did she learn? She had to switch up to online learning. This was not something that was done traditionally. We have traditional routes and we have non-traditional routes. What COVID-19 did, it upended everything within even the P.L.A.R framework. Now, P.L.A.R is prior learning assessment and recognition. What did that actually mean? It meant then someone who was caring for someone at home during the pandemic had to now ask themselves critical questions. How do I now keep on doing what I'm doing? How do I earn my keep? How am I going to continue studying? And this was a huge, huge challenge for everyone. Now, Professor Barrett touched on so many things in terms of the informal sector. The informal sector was the hardest, I think one of the hardest hit sectors in our region to date. So if we could go to the other slide, please. So the informal sector, when we talk about the informal sector, a lot of us think we know the informal sector, but I'm going to bring it out into the open now in terms of what we use as local parlance or our local language then. So we had, during the pandemic, we had plumbers who were not certified, had to come in to fix people's plumbing. We had welders, masons, people who were doing geriatric care, right, had to come in to help care for the elderly in homes, not just the residential homes that were registered, but also come in to help care for people who were at home. So people who were in the informal sector, as we call it, who had agreed and non-formal, okay, so we have your traditional route, which is the secondary and your post-secondary forms of education and so on. Then the informal sector now during COVID-19 had to step up to the plate. And what we saw was that they actually stepped up to the plate in terms of what happened during COVID-19. So in Trinidad, for example, I'm not sure if everyone here is on TikTok, and I'm going to make a reference here to TikTok. TikTok blew up during the pandemic with local artisans who had to showcase their talents, and they were selling their talents, right? They were selling candle making, they were selling bread, they were selling different types of things. You had caterers who came up on TikTok and they were social selling. Now, if you look at the slide here, you'll see change culture continuity post-COVID-19. Now, why I've jumped into COVID-19, I want to, because the last 2 years didn't just happen, they ravaged us. And if we are to take a PLAR system and an approach to PLAR post-COVID, we have to bear in mind the lessons pre-COVID, we have to bear in mind the lessons intra-COVID, and we have to bear in mind the lessons that we have to take forward post-COVID. Now, I talk about culture a lot. Ms. Nora Hall Simon will always hear me say culture and PLAR. So my talk today is about innovations, best practices, what happened. And I'm going to tell stories continuously here. So I will tell you a story about David, who is a plumber in Trinidad and Tobago. David is 42 years old and had to call me. He called me over in 2021, and he said to me, Azra, I need some help. So I said, what's wrong, David? And he said to me, Azra, I have a lot of people calling me, but they're asking me for my papers. Now I'm going to use local parlance again. They're asking me for my papers. Azra, I don't have papers, but I'm the best plumber for the last 26 years. I think he was a plumber for. So I said to him, okay, can you come in? Now I took a chance. He came to my home because everything was locked down then. But David needed to earn his keep. He needed to feed his family as a plumber. Now, pre-COVID, David had no issue going to lots of people's homes to conduct plumbing services. However, when COVID hit, there was a specter of one, contamination, of course, and the mere fact that you couldn't go into people's home, you had to wear masks and so on. We're still wearing masks. But so David came to me and I said to him, I'm going to assist you here. I'm going to put something down for you that you can use to articulate what you know, what you've done, your years of experience. David sat with me. We did this over 3 days. David went to a couple of homes. The homes called me. People called me to validate who David was. And there was a story to be told about David. So every time David went into a home, he conducted his plumbing services, he got paid. Now I'm going to also bring in another word here, a stakeholder. Who are the stakeholders here? It was the person who had to use David's services. David, as an informal tradesman, artisan, is a stakeholder. I was a stakeholder as a training provider and a PLAR assessor. I was a stakeholder. The industry was a stakeholder. The macroeconomic part of it is a stakeholder here. So this is David's story. From David, it went to other persons. People started to continuously call to find out, okay, is he skilled? Is she skilled? Then training providers started to call these are training providers that I deal with. So a little back end with the training providers that I deal with. I go to training providers and training providers come to me to help them get accreditation through EduQual, which is an awarding body out of the UK. Now, EduQual has a PLAR policy document that centers have to abide by once they come into EduQual. So what happened during COVID is, of course, face-to-face sessions were no longer there. They had to switch up to online. However, what also happened is the traditional tech VOC programs, which were done face-to-face. So let's say your hybrid electrical vehicle, HEV. We had centers with geriatric care nursing assistant, pharmacy tech, medical laboratory assistant. All of them had to switch up one to online modalities to teach their learners. However, there was COVID-19 presented, one, an opportunity, but also a crucial challenge in how the tech VOC subjects were being taught through my centers. So we had to sit with them now and work through a lot of the modalities on how to deliver what you had to deliver on the online modality of learning. A lot of the learners, however, did not or could not acclimatize to that type of teaching methodology because they were so accustomed to face-to-face training, especially in the tech VOC arena. It meant then massaging and coaxing and advising and assimilating all of these different variables into one way to get them inside of the training and to keep the continuum of training going forward. And I will also tell you, the challenge did pose many threats to training providers, and training providers, some of them had to close their doors, unfortunately. What did that mean? It meant then that the training provider, of course, when they close the doors, some of them are now reopening because the country has opened back up. However, it meant then that the learners who were in that system there, for example, one center who was teaching hairdressing, she had to close her doors to her learners because it was just not feasible for her to do so. And also the learners just could not come to terms with doing hairdressing online. After that challenge was posed, then we had learners who then came to us to ask and say, Miss, I have done hairdressing for the last 6 months for my grandmother, for my sister, for my cousin, etc. I said, how did you learn? And they said, well, Miss, I had some training before, but I went on YouTube and I looked at the videos and I taught myself. So we move away from the training provider now who has closed its doors temporarily. And we go back to the learner within COVID. This was a regular email or message that we would get from learners during COVID, that they would have taught themselves or were teaching themselves various skills and disciplines. My next question would have been to them, are you able to conduct this? Are you doing it? Are you charging for your services? And some of them said yes. Some said no, they're just doing it for the experience. And this brings me back again to this word, culture, continuity, and continuity. So within the 2 years, so many stories came in to us. Some beautiful stories and some stories that pose many challenges and also many risks as well. So there was one learner who taught herself how to braid hair during the year of 2021. She then went on to accept home visits to braid persons' hair. She called me one day and said, Miss Azra, is there a way I could get a certificate or something that says I am a professional breeder? Those were her words, right? And I said to her, at the moment, we're going to have to look to see how we do this. And I looked for a standard on breeding, which is the usual route. We looked for a standard. I saw one component in the CVQ for breeding. And I said to her, we're going to have to find someone to assess you and give you that. She said to me, Miss Azra, I have to get this certificate like yesterday because people are asking for it. Now I'm bringing this to the forefront because these were the challenges that we were faced with and also the opportunities. I then gave her name to one of the training providers who had closed its doors. And that training provider, the director of that establishment, was able to give that learner a certificate, albeit a certificate of participation, to validate her learning during the couple of months that she learned how to breed. She braided, I think it was close to 40 people in 2021. She earned money. Again, a stakeholder. Then she said to me, Miss Azra, can the persons who I braided their hair, can they tell the story of what I did? I said, do you mean a testimonial? She said, yes. I said, sure. And myself and the training provider, the academic director of that training institution, we accepted testimonials from the persons whose hair she braided. Now, I want to tell you and everyone here listening about stories that are told by learners, stories that are told by persons who are the recipients of the skill sets that we have in the Caribbean. We tell masterful stories in the Caribbean about learning. We tell beautiful anecdotes of what someone did for us. And we also, on the other side of the spectrum, tell stories about horrible things that were done to us. And we all know this. So I'm going to go into culture a little bit here. Now, follow me here. So 4 testimonials came in for this learner who did, and I would keep saying learner, I will say student, learner interchangeably. So 4 testimonials came in of people whose hair was braided. What that meant is we got 4 stories. These stories were anecdotal. The stories told us about this girl and her ability to breed and how satisfied they were. Now I will ask a question here, not just because I want to bring it to the fore, because I think sometimes we miss this. These anecdotal stories and testimonials were given by friends and relatives, and one a complete stranger to this learner. And they were stories told in the way we as Caribbean people alone can tell a story about someone's ability to do something. And that is the point I want to bring across this morning, that when we go forward as a PLAR rubric as a diaspora, and more so for Jamaica, because Jamaica is going full throttle with it, we have to remember the way we are going to tell the stories of the last 2 years and going forward, and of course the past and all of the experience that the persons had. So the stories were beautiful stories. Do we now accept them as evidence that the learner is competent? And I would say that we have to have a hard conversation around this, because parity of esteem, as Ms. Norda alluded to in her presentation, is something that we have to look at critically. The last 2 years didn't just happen. It bulldozed us. And of all of the things that I saw was that the artisans, the skillsmen, the tradesmen, the hairdressers, the plumbers, the welders, the bricklayers, the tilemen, all of them stepped up to the plate. However, most of them would have anecdotal evidence during that 2 years to give to us and say, yes, they did a good job. So I want to say that my centers who I deal with had the challenge of creating a proper PLAR rubric within their system of evidence collection. Now, this is a challenge that most people would have, right? Even us. So that is one aspect. How do we continue after COVID-19 with PLAR? And I think now we can't. Professor Barrett said something. She said there was a paper, I think it was I have it here, on life. It's adult learning. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it was 10 years in the making. There's a white paper on something. Trinidad and Tobago, same thing, right? I don't think that this is subjective to me and what I've seen. I don't think we could miss the mark anymore in terms of what PLAR can do and is doing and how we accept it. And there's a word that was put up on a slide, acceptance. My centers had to accept that PLAR is no longer just lip service. It is not a nice policy document anymore. PLAR is part of the macroeconomic policy of the entire diaspora now. If we are to accept PLAR as part of our DNA going forward and to actually create and insulate economies in the Caribbean, then PLAR has to be on the front burner of every government in the Caribbean. And it can be cross-governmental, island to island, we can do it the same way we saw how we got together, we locked down countries, etc. It's the same way now. We have to pivot the PLAR systems throughout, because what has happened over the last 2 years, people have told us in no uncertain terms, they're not going back to university. They're not going into formal education. They are not going into that. They made inroads in their informal sectors. They made them living. Let's think about that in terms of a pandemic. They made a living. I know people who were laid off from their jobs. They worked 20 years plus in jobs and they were laid off during the pandemic. And these people used their informal learning that they had within the homes that they lived in, where they grew up, places of interest that they went to. There was a woman who sold baskets during the pandemic. And I asked her, where did you learn to do baskets the way you've done? She said, Miss, I went to one course 16 years ago that the Blind Welfare Association had done. And this is what is putting a penny in my pocket today. Now, I said, would you take that further? She said to me, actually, I'm not employed anymore and I'm going to make this my business and I'm opening a store, right? I said, what kind of store? She said, I'm opening an online store. I said, that is wonderful. Now, these were the stories that were told to us every single month, because we would get letters, we would get emails, we would get notes from training providers who were getting lots of letters from learners. Some of the traditional training providers in Trinidad and Tobago, the ones who do the MBAs and the bachelors, etc., called up to say, Azra, we need to do balloon making. We need to do candle making. We need to do coconut oil, pressed coconut oil. I'm working with one center in Trinidad and Tobago where they're doing 100 skilled courses now to get program accreditation. Do you know, none of them are over 3 months long. They're short, sharp, and give them the skill sets to go out there to earn a living. They also had to sit in a session with me to look at how they could PLAR the persons coming in to do those skill sets and get their accreditation. That was a huge part. The CEO of the company said to me, she said, Azra, we did not think about what they would have learned prior. I said, most of your learners, most of them would have some prior learning. And she said, yes. So we had to create now a crucible for those learners who are coming into those programs to get their evidence-based assessments done. Now, we'll go to another stakeholder. So the assessors had to be trained to assess the evidence. Where did they get the evidence from? So are we going to, and I'll throw another question out here to the audience, are we going to accept that someone can learn on YouTube? You know, it's a big question that was posed to us every single month. And I would say to you, in my opinion, because I learned things on YouTube over the course of the pandemic, I learned, yes. How do we assess the learner who has learned on YouTube is another question. How do we credential? We are talking about micro-credentials and digital badging. Those are questions that have to come to the fore fast and furious now. And we have to pick up all of those people who were learning all during the pandemic. I have seen people in my classes sit under a tree and take Wi-Fi to learn on a video tutorial that I did with them, right? And she said to me, one of the learners said, Miss, can I demonstrate with a phone here? I said, yes, because we are doing telemarketing, right? And we're doing call center operations with a lot of learners now. And she said to me, Miss, you know, I answered the phone in my mom's bakery. Is that counted as evidence of, you know, that I could use? And I said, you'll see, right? These are stories that people have to tell. And I'm going to say it's not a pet peeve, but I think we need to get over ourselves as a diaspora. Things have changed. It's not going back to the norm. We think people can just go parity of esteem and we'll say, okay, the national qualifications framework is X and we have degree holders and we have MBA holders. And what about the other person who we need to bring straight up the ladder with lightning speed? Lightning speed so that they can earn a living, they can earn the respect of their peers, and they can earn the respect of the international community. I have people who do our programs with my centers and myself who go abroad, and the esteem and the accolades that they get is second to none, right? So I don't know if we could change the slide now because I've been talking to this slide for a while. So what happened? What happened during the pandemic? So there was an ILO report that was done in 2021. If we get to the next slide, I'll read it out because there's a lot on the slide. Right. So the ILO, I'll precede, it's quite a bit here, that greater occupational instability is associated with a higher prevalence of informal, precarious, low-skill activities for adolescents who enter the labor market early and for young people with little work experience and less developed job skills. The high occupational turnover hinders the possibility of accumulating specific qualifications. That's a big one. This came out in 2021 in an ILO labor report. Quite a huge, huge indictment of what is happening. And, you know, if we could go to the other slide, please. This one is quite tedious on the eyes. Can we go to the other slide? Thank you. So the challenge posed in what technology. So I spoke to technology, like your YouTubers, you know, but I'm also going to put something else in the mix here. We have had in the last 2 years, hundreds, if not thousands of people laid off. Those are not just young people. There are also middle-aged people and older people who were laid off and had to find a skill set in order to adapt and survive. Adaptability, resilience, and survival of the fittest was the order of the day in the last 2 years. Yes, the government gave grants. Yes, the government was helping and so on. However, as we all know, we were all stretching dollars during the pandemic, every single one of us, right? So whilst we have the youths who have to become employable and they have the womb to the tomb scenario, I think we need to say also, as a region, that the generations are not just the youth. We also have older people in the workforce who have a host of informal skills that can and should be recognized. For example, David was 42. He would not be considered a youth, of course not, but he had a skill set. We have mechanics in our countries who have little to no specific credentials, but they have been working for the last 27 to 30 years. The mechanics did not shut their doors. They still had to fix the cars, right? So what do? The womb to the tomb. Are we actually looking at it as a diaspora, or are we only looking at one aspect? And I think those hard conversations have to be had. So if we now go to look at innovation, our training centers had to innovate. Some of them, I will say this openly, did not want to because they were not accustomed to. Where did that leave the learner? In a lurch. It left them in limbo. They had to find alternative ways to get their skill sets. What did they do? They went onto YouTube. They started to look for digital badging. And it's been going on for the last 2 years. It was just it was like a 360-degree they had to do on themselves. I now have older persons who want to come in to call center operations. They've worked elsewhere. They've worked as a secretary here. They've been answering the phone. No certificates. One learner is 57 years old. And she said to me, am I too old to get a certificate? I said, of course you're not. You can get your certificate. She said, but how will I get my certificate? I'm 57. I think she had some O levels, And she said to me, Azra, would my experience count? I said, yes. She was laid off in 2020 from her job as a medical secretary. She was laid off. They closed their doors and they kept only the essential workers. She was deemed not essential at that point in time, unfortunately. So she was then laid off. She's 57 years old. And I'm putting this out here because I think we need to understand the real picture. And the story going forward has to be told in such a way that we tell a holistic picture. The womb to the tomb is here. I have people who live in care homes here in Trinidad and Tobago who are crocheting blankets to sell. And I ask them, where did you learn this skill? Well, they did it over the years and they're just going to use it now. And I said, would you like to get a credential on that? Yes, of course, because it makes you, feel better. There's a respect and so on. So let's go back to our 57 call center operator. This woman is a 57-year-old call center operator. She is one of the most fantastic teleoperators I have come across in a long while. No formal qualification as a call center operator. She will get it with us. So I'm going to bring in my own experience now with the call center. So call center operators are usually trained, the call centers would train them, etc. What we found is that we take an international qualification, and I'm not knocking anything here now, and we bring it into our diaspora, and we say, okay, this is the international standard. Can you do this? Can you do that? And we'll train them up to that standard. What we missed, and what we usually miss, is the context of our storytelling. And I'm going back again to the storytelling, because every call center operator that we onboarded in the last 7 weeks had a story to tell of where they got their experience and how they got it. They did not have a credential that said they had it. They had a story. So I'm going to bring to the fore now another aspect: stakeholders and storytelling, stakeholders in our culture, stakeholders and the feedback that they have to expect and they should be expecting. And what about our educational providers? We have the universities, we have the other training providers, etc. We have a host of training providers in the Caribbean. There's no shortage of training providers. Well, what we do need is parity of esteem. What we do need is an elevation at lightning speed of these informal workers. What we do need at lightning speed is someone to hold the baton and the torch and wear it high and well and quickly to say that these people can be assessed, can be credentialed, can go out into the world of work. Not just the youth, but everyone. Everyone, right? We're now raising the retirement age to 65. That would mean from, let's say they start working at 17 to 65, they would have worked probably 3 jobs or 4. Some people may stay in the same job. However, we looked at, it was more of an experiment on my part. I asked 10 security guards in Trinidad and Tobago to sit with me in a training session 2 months ago. And they came in. We were allowed to have 10 people in that room. It's a big room. And again, I'm telling a story. And these 10 security guards, out of the 10, there was one security guard who had 6 months experience. The other security guards all had 9 to 27 years of experience. And I'm talking about older security guards who were working. They worked during the pandemic, they worked after the pandemic, they were seeing about their families, they were earning their keep, paying their dues to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, etc. And they came in and they sat with me and I said, no, some say, people told me I was doing a social experiment. I said, it's not a social experiment. And it's not an experiment. It's something I need to see for myself. So I sat with them and I asked them if they would come out on a Saturday for 2 hours every Saturday for 4 weeks. They did come. They sat with me for 2 hours and I asked them questions because I was also doing a PLAR, a mini dissertation, right? I would call it that because it really represented what I was doing. So I was gathering data from these security guards and I chose them because they are front service people. They serve the population. They are out there. They were out there during the pandemic. And you'll hear me talking about the pandemic all the time because I want to talk about the elephant in the room. We cannot say that things could go back to normal. It can't. It cannot. Right? So anyway, this social thing I was doing. So they came in and I started to train them. In one, we did a protocol training. We did a customer service training. I did a call center operator, a little bit of call center operations and so on. Just bite-sized chunks of learning I was doing with them. And they said to me, they did bits and bobs of it over the years of their sojourn where they were working. A lot of them were working with the same company for more than 24 years, some of them 15 years. And they said, you know, it would be nice to get a certificate, miss. I could get one. Again, a story to be told. A certificate tells a story. And I don't want anyone here to forget that. A certificate tells a story to the world. It's your relevance. It's your currency. It's your skill set. It recognizes you. And sometimes we drop the recognition in PLAR and we say prior learning assessment and recognition at the end of the recognition. But when we recognize these learners for who they are, what they represent, and how they are creating waves in our GDP, I think only then we would understand why that ladder has to be this and not here and here. We have had that ladder and parity of esteem conversation for years. In Trinidad and Tobago, many years ago, they did the workforce assessment centers where they were going to P.L.A.R, a lot of people in masonry, welding, different occupational areas. I don't know if anybody from the NTA is here from Trinidad and Tobago, but I'll say it. It didn't level up. It didn't bring to the fore hundreds of people who were then formally certified, right? And I think one of the lessons to be learned from that is stakeholder engagement was not as pivotal as it should be. I am telling stories to training providers in order to coax them to adopt a P.L.A.R rubric within their system that is just not fancy on paper, but is real in principle. Real in principle means that you recognize with your heart, soul, and mind that these learners have established skill sets that you can assess. So the Workforce Assessment Center didn't pan out as it should. There's a gaping hole now that should be. And like David, going back to the story that I started with, like David, he did not go to the Workforce Assessment Center. There was a word up on the chat, communication. How do we communicate that this has to be given priority? And it has to be. So David would have gone to the Workforce Assessment Center 10 years ago. He didn't. Why? Why didn't he feel secure and comfortable to go there? Why did 10 security guards come to me, sit with me for those 2 hours on a Saturday, and were comfortable enough to relate what they had learned over the years? Why were they comfortable enough to say, Miss Azra, so that's a skill I have? Yes, it is. Right? I am not saying that we close the door on anyone. What I'm saying is we need to communicate. We need to have the relevant stakeholders on board. And we need to take best practices and make them even better. And we need to do it at lightning speed. So what do we do with all the learners who learned in the last 2 years? Are we going to empty our pockets and say, okay, 2 years you were learning how to bake artisan breads, but you didn't go into a classroom? Are we going to now negate the learner who did that and who sold artisan breads online and made a living? I don't think so. And I think the stakeholders, the employers, the government bodies, the agencies, the NGOs, the community centers, we all need to understand that we need to address this in an appropriate way, in an accepting way. So, technology has upended it, yes, but there are some people who, for example, in this same training provider I'm working with, the person who is teaching how to make virgin pressed coconut oil did not learn from technology. He learned because he was a coconut vendor, and he learned how to do virgin pressed coconut oil. And he is now teaching it. They have to now teach him how to teach a little bit, and that's fine. So there's so many variables. So I'll go back to David. I'll go back to the Workforce Assessment Center, and I'm going to connect some dots here. So when the Workforce Assessment Centers were set up, a lot of the private sector employers were not really on par with it. What does that mean? It meant there was little to no acceptance of what they were going to come out with. Can we do that now? No. And I think government agencies and agencies like JTEC and so on have to understand that this vehicle to move our countries forward at lightning speed and to insulate us against something as large as the pandemic again has to be done. We are faced with climate disasters all the time in the Caribbean. We were just faced with a pandemic. We don't have any control over climate change. We don't have any control over the next pandemic, which may come. But what we can do is insulate our economies by placing the best practice inside of there, placing the lessons learned over the last 2 years, going back to the last 10 years, bring it forward and engage stakeholders. Your stakeholder is not just the employer, stakeholder is the mother, the father, everyone, the shopkeeper. These are your stakeholders. And we need to have this conversation in every table, everywhere, so that it is accepted. It's not a hard job anymore. It's not a puzzle in the fabric of learning and training. Because what I found with the training providers is that whilst they had a policy, they were, I wouldn't say clueless, but they were confused. How do I do this, Azra? How do I do it? How do I train my assessors in a P.L.A.R framework? How do I accept the evidence? How? This is what we have to do now. And I think once we have, I think there is acceptance for P.L.A.R now. I think there is a broad acceptance of it, but we can't eliminate the last 2 years either in the P.L.A.R framework. We have to see what and how and where and when and why this happened, and then take the lessons forward. I feel very passionate about it, as you can tell, because I think, as I've told many people, we have an almost forgotten host of people who need to be assimilated quickly, so that phrase, parity of esteem, the relevance, the communication, that is there at the forefront. And I'm not sure how, or if there would be some galvanized effort between the countries, because Jamaica has so much to tell about it. But I think if we are looking at taking the diaspora as a whole forward and insulating economies through this, then it's a big part of our DNA going forward. These people contribute. We help them contribute, and we have to continue helping. And there are ways and methods to do this, but we need to do it within a framework. Whilst we do have frameworks that exist, we need to understand our culture. We need to understand where we're going. We need to understand that the narrative of the informal sector is quite different. And we need to understand the psyche that we're dealing with. So do I have any more slides? I'm not sure, because I've been talking. Is there anything else? I don't think so. Right. White culture, yeah. So this is all what I've been talking about, and integrating the informal as well as the new skill set. So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge now, but I think it's a challenge that is welcome, and it's a challenge that should be taken up by everyone. Training providers need to be assisted. I would also say that it is imperative that we do help them. We're not going to go back to the same old again. It's not going to happen. I will tell you, in our own little sphere of call center and customer service is dear to my heart. And we have so many people who have worked in customer service, and they want to be, they want that acceptance. They want it, they need it, right? I've spoken to employers as well who say to me, Azra, I want the attitude. I want someone who could bring the attitude to the workplace. I want the problem solving. I want the critical thinking. I want the knowledge, not just the skill. They don't want to see knowledge, KSA. They want the skills. They want the aptitude, the attitude. And that's what we have to capture. So I talked about culture a lot, and culture in the context of storytelling within our experiences, and telling our experiences and capturing the experiences to say, yes. As an assessor, it is a it is part of what we have to do. So we have West Indian literature, we have West Indian songs, we have calypso, we have reggae, we have all of these things. Learning also has to take into account that paradigm, and how we assess the learner and the evidence collection has to take into account our culture. The mini dissertation I did was on culture and P.L.A.R in the Caribbean. And the person who was assessing my mini dissertation was Canadian. And she asked me a question and she said to me, "So Azra, you all tell stories all the time?" I said, "We tell stories in our song, in our dance, in our narratives, the way we drive, the way we speak, the way we dress. We tell stories all the time." That is the Caribbean DNA. And I think we have to expressly understand that in the P.L.A.R framework as well. So I think is my time up? So people are talking about the great resignation, the 4-day work week. I would like to talk about making the informal more part of the regional dialogue, which I've been saying all the time. Make the skill sets more acceptable by placing more accessible acceptance rubrics that are more and that are not counterintuitive to what has transpired in the last 2 years. Create viable linkages that create an avenue that is conducive to the appreciation of P.L.A.R systems and can propel this forward. And we need to train more P.L.A.R practitioners and tell stories. We need to be able to tell stories through these practitioners and vice versa. And I think I'm open for some questions now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Such an interesting presentation. Looking at the power of storytelling within the context of culture. You know, as you spoke, Azra, I thought about the fact that our societies, our oral societies, we are used to that kind of culture. And Dr. Zaria Malcolm from Excelsior Community College, she raised a valuable point in the chat. She said that the power of stories and qualitative data, so often we underestimate its importance. So when we're assessing, we often think about, okay, I'm going to give you a challenge test, I'm going to get your portfolio and all of that. And we sometimes think of it in a formal way, but we also have to incorporate that important aspect of listening to the story and also helping persons to document their own stories. Brian Wallace in the chat says there should be a standard for the recording and presentation of informal learning for assessment. If a portfolio is used, it could still be standardized. Do you have any comment on that?
I know there are standards, yes. What Brian Wallace here, I think he's speaking to a more concrete standard that accepts the word acceptance for the storytelling and the cultural connotations of our learning, how it is discretely aggregated, has to be standardized. However, standardization in P.L.A.R, we need to be flexible. Nora, you had a slide up and it said flexible. We need to be flexible. We need to be flexible the way we accept what we accept and the way we tell the story to the industry stakeholders, to the governmental bodies, the NGOs, everyone, the international arena. So, for example, you look at Guyana now. Guyana has oil, and of course, they need skill sets like yesterday in order to do what they have to do. So now they have taken a decision, I believe, to train many thousands of people, but they're also trying to P.L.A.R some of the people. However, those people have to tell a story of what they did and where. What standard are we using to aggregate the possibility of creating a nice badge for that learner to go into, say, Exxon? Exxon is readily available to accept those things, but we need to package it up now. And yes, the standard would have to be in, but the standard has to be flexible. It cannot compromise quality, but it has to be flexible enough to understand our cultural connotations in learning. Right?
Thank you so much. Diane Irvin says, thank you, Azra. Your stories have made a most memorable presentation. Thank you. And Vincent Peterkin says, a very welcomed presentation. Mrs. Powell Salmon, she says, excellent presentation. And of course, it's memorable. Stories are always memorable. And we learn by listening to stories and integrating those stories in our own realities, knowing that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were so many changes. Persons took on new hobbies, and you spoke about the YouTube experience. Many of us went to YouTube. We became do-it-yourselfers. That culture has really taken hold in the Caribbean. Persons became experts in at TikTok and took on media personalities.
Yes.
And so all of these things that persons are doing informally, are we looking to formalize it? Are we interested in giving them a way out? Or are we going to hold on to, I may dare say, or ancient philosophies, perhaps colonial philosophies? Are we holding on to ideas that are no longer relevant, or are we truly seeking to make our people better? Dr. Dakers says, some valid points presented, Ms. Nathud Khan. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate the cultural connection, because as we offer PLAR, we're not in Europe, we're not in the United States of America, we are in the Caribbean, and we have to look at how our people learn, how they express themselves, and we have to be in tune with that and ensure that we are not missing out on it, and we're not approaching them in an aloof manner, but we're right there with them. Thank you once more. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. Let me just...
All right, and so we're going to move on to our third presenter, and our presenter is Dr. Norma Sinclair, and she is going to be looking at some of the best practices in this 21st century for implementation. Now, Dr. Norma Sinclair, she's a proud alumna of St. Hugh's High School. So if you have anything to do with St. Hugh's High School, you can say yay in Jamaica. She has worked in educational psychology. She has specialized in measurement and evaluation, and she has also done assessment programs for teacher licensure and certification across the Connecticut State Department of Education in the US. She has managed development, standard setting, administration, as well as psychometric evaluation of the statewide assessments. Dr. Sinclair, she's an author, she's a researcher, and she is into evaluation and research methods in measurement. She's currently serving on the faculty of the Department of Graduate Education and Leadership at the NCU in Mandeville, teaching quantitative and qualitative research methods. And she also advises doctoral students. She is co-chair of the Tertiary Education Committee of the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network. And of course, the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force, they recently appointed a tertiary committee that has really been working with us to ensure that we are all connected across the diaspora and we are able to come up with solutions for Jamaica. Thank you so much, Dr. Sinclair. She's about to share with us now. Tune in, listen carefully.
Hello, everyone. As Mrs. Hall said, I'm Norma Sinclair on behalf of the Tertiary Education Task Force of the Jamaica Diaspora Action Network. I'd like to express my appreciation to the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission for inviting me to participate in the Commission's Prior Learning and Recognition Symposium. It's my hope that I will bring some benefits, some information to the table as you work to help Jamaica go higher. So then my focus today is on best practices in the development and administration of PLAR programs. And I'm looking at it from the North America perspective because that's where I am located at this time. And the best practices I'll be just talking about are sort of based on information drawn from three sources primarily. They are one, the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning here in the States, that's an industry leader in the area of PLA and whose credos we can help you build it. I'm also basing it on the American Council on Education that is one of the associations that represents all types of U.S. accredited degree granting institutions, 2-year and 4-year, and a document as well from Ontario discussing their PLA programs in that part of the world. Much of what I'm going to say is you'll find that there's quite a bit of overlap between what Mrs. Hall said, what the other presenters said. Best practices are best practices, that they're basically the same everywhere you go. So they will vary to some great degree based on the context, based on the cultural dynamics that Mrs. Nordatham discussed and described. But there is quite a bit of overlap. PLAR is practiced internationally throughout the world, and in the UK, as was discussed, in Canada, in the US, in the Caribbean, in Europe. It's just everywhere at this point in time. I think people are beginning to wake up and realize the importance of recognizing prior learning. So we're going to start by going, we've talked a great deal. I'm not sure how to blow this up, the slide. If you can, yeah, thank you very much. We've talked a great deal about just exactly what is prior learning, and so I'll just go through this very quickly. I'm going to be focusing in on tertiary level, and so it's a process used by post-secondary institutions to award college credit for students' verifiable college level knowledge and expertise that's acquired through life and work experience. And so that is the definition that's most widely used in the States. It's the key here is that the learning must be validated at a college level in order to receive academic credit. Now we'll look at the demand for prior learning. There's no way that you can argue that prior learning assessment and recognition that there is not a demand for that at this time. It's been made very clear by all the previous presenters. In Jamaica, certainly it's a part of Jamaica's national qualification framework, as was said before. In the U.S., we know that there are more than 35 million workers here have completed some college, but no degree. And by 2027, it is estimated that 70% of all jobs will require some post-secondary education, yet only 38% of adults 25 or older yet 35% of adults 25 or older have completed high school or less than high school education. So there is, however, they are clearly functioning in society. They're working, they're getting experience in all kinds of ways. And therefore, that experience needs to be, there's a demand for prior learning assessment because that learning and experience needs to be recognized. There is an increase in technology and training alternatives, on-the-job training, professional workshops, online degree programs. People are not simply going into a formal classroom and receiving training in skills and competencies anymore. They're being offered in a variety of different ways, and this has to be recognized. Another reason for the demand is the increasing institutional competition for students who are working adults. Uh, I just recently saw a short clip of a woman who was a wedding planner for many years. She had to cut her post-secondary education short for a variety of different reasons, but she went on to become a professional wedding planner and gained a lot of very valuable experience. That after a while, after she had raised a family and she started uh, started occurring to her that she would like to go ahead and uh, get perhaps a degree. And but how could she do that really? That she was thinking. She hasn't. She. It's been many years since she has been in college, been in the formal learning setting. Fortunately, she made contact with a university that she'd started in many years before, and she was immediately engaged by advisors and mentors who were able to reassure her that her wedding planning experience was a very valuable experience that could be converted into actual credit at the college level and that upfront experience with college personnel was able to sort of and encourage her to continue her college education and to complete that education. So there are uh, as was said by the previous presenters, many working adults who have gained experience through other methods besides a formal education, and colleges are at this point, in institutions, post-secondary institutions, are really competing for those students, for those working adults. Uh, uh, Another thing is that there are new educational policies that may actually limit the availability of students. There are some places where there may be, uh, I understand it's under discussion in Jamaica that the length of high schooling may actually be extended for everyone in Jamaica. And uh, if that policy is put in place, there is a possibility that there will be that post-secondary institutions will be in a situation where they have fewer students coming out of high school at the rate they had been before, and the alternative is to look for to start broaden the scope of post-secondary institutions to look at other sources of for students. Corporate needs are pushing for higher, faster credentials for a more competitive workforce. And of course, one very important thing is the soaring cost of completing a degree. Student loans are absolutely staggering at this point. There are a lot of students who are leaving college because they just cannot afford it. They have to go out to work for a little bit and save and come back to college. Very often that coming back doesn't actually happen. So the soaring cost of completing a degree is an issue, and prior learning assessment is one way of reducing those costs, uh, just because they will require fewer courses in order to complete the degree. So, hence the demand for prior learning assessment. I think we're well aware by now of the benefits and the benefits of PLAR, certainly in the US. We've talked about it cutting college costs. Some of the benefits are many of the people who are involved in prior learning assessment are working adults. So, in working adult, it's been found via research that there is more persistence among these college students, so that they're more likely to complete, where younger students who've not had work experience, who've not been out in the world, may take a longer time to complete. So many of these students use PLA and use college as a way of accelerating their career or their profession, whatever it is that they want to do in life. So they use the prior experience that they have as a way of gaining credits and speed up the process of completing a degree, and then use it as a way of moving on up the career ladder. One of the other benefits of PLA, there are loads here, and I'm just highlighting some of them, is that it facilitates credit transfer for students who move quite a bit. Certainly here in the United States, those who go through PLA programs, those experiences, that those credits become formal credits that represent specific kinds of courses in many areas. Specific courses, there's some crosswalks between experience that students have gained in the working world and actual courses that are offered at the post-secondary level. And so those credits remain credits on their record, and they move with them, so that if they transfer, if they move from one college to another, those credits move with them. Okay, let's move on. So there are a great many benefits to PLA programs. So we're going to go right into some of the best practices that have been recognized based on the research that's been conducted by the organizations that I just mentioned. It's been found that organizational culture defined, first of all, let's just look at how we define that. It's defined as a way to behave in an organizational setting. It consists of shared beliefs and values, how people interact with each other. And those kinds of things are reflected in the mission and vision and the strategic goals of an organization. And so one of the things that research has pointed out is that organizational culture is a very important precursor to being able to embrace prior learning assessment. So that if our organizational culture is such that that prior learning assessment is prior learning is such that it's supportive of prior learning assessment, that it's more likely to occur in that kind of setting. Embracing PLAR means acknowledging that college level learning can occur outside of the traditional classroom. So if given the appropriate organizational culture, the institution will be able to actually embrace the idea that learning can happen outside of the traditional classroom. Now, efforts to provide credit for prior learning are most likely to be successful if the policies and the practices are congruent with the institutional mission and strategic goals of those in leadership positions. It's really important. The leadership within an organization is very, very important. If the leadership provides a kind of a culture or supports or encourages kind of a culture that assumes and that agrees that prior learning assessment can actually that learning can actually happen outside of the organization, can happen outside of the traditional classroom setting, then it is more likely that that prior learning assessment will be successful. It's very important to understand that organizational culture determines what the policies and procedures uh, uh, are within an organization. Um, so the policies and procedures, given that you have the appropriate organizational culture for prior learning, policies and procedures are necessary, but they're not sufficient in and of themselves. Leadership must be able to establish and build accompanying infrastructure, be able to engage faculty members in the process of assessing and supporting prior learning, and must be able to effectuate outreach into the community. Some of the things that are previous presenters has said as well, that those things are also necessary in order for PLAR to thrive. If we embrace, if there's an organizational culture that embraces PLAR, then that institution, that organization will also embrace that there are different sources of college level prior learning, that it may come from work experience, may come from military training, may come from police training, may come from licenses and certifications of all types, many of those that were discussed previously. They may come from seminars and workshops and in-service training, um, study at what might be regarded as unaccredited institutions, online learning through YouTube, for example, and through other means, or through open educational resources, and simply independent reading and research, that the sources of the prior learning are just quite varied, and and they have to, one has to accept that, the institution has to accept that, the organization has to accept that in order for PLAR to thrive. Also, one of the other things, one of the other best practices is that there are a variety of methods of assessing prior learning. We talked about some of them, previously as well, and those also have to be embraced. And now, not all institutions here or elsewhere here, but certainly I'm talking from the North American perspective, not all institutions and not all states uh, utilize at this time all of these methods, but the likelihood that they may be used is something that really has to be embraced as well. Again, that is a part of that organizational culture. So institutes, and some of these, of course, are very traditional institutional transcripts, standardized exams, challenge exams. Many of these have been around for a very long time, but there are newer methods of assessing prior learning, transcripts from training facilities like the military and the police, and individual portfolio assessment that we often think of in terms of using within a formal educational environment, but can also be used as a way of assessing prior learning for non-formal learning, um, non-formal education, non-formal instruction. And of course, pre-evaluated professional learning that is often on the job kinds of learning, but that here, certainly here in the States, that are pre-evaluated and that are standardized. How it's done is standardized so that it can be used um, across the various sectors. What's key here, before I move on, I should just say that certainly in the States, what's key to all of these methods of assessing prior learning is that they're undergirded by a set of standards that we'll talk about in another couple of slides very briefly. These are called these are standards that are from one of the organizations that I pulled my information from. Again, the Council of for Adult and Experiential Learning. These are standards for assessing prior learning that are really sort of the base, the base or the foundation for developing assessment methods for prior learning. And these 10 standards are internationally acknowledged as the best guidelines to ensure quality and reliability in prior learning assessment. And as I said, we'll discuss them in a bit more detail very shortly. So we talked about organizational culture and the concept that there has to be a certain culture that's accepting of prior learning in order for prior learning assessment to thrive. And a second best practice is developing, having a robust infrastructure for prior learning assessment. As the slide here indicates, that PLAR is more likely to be successful if the leadership views it as critical to the institution's mission and vision, and identifies PLAR in its strategic goals, so that it has to be part and parcel of the leadership of the institution, or certainly if we're talking about within the United States, certainly at the state level, because quite frankly, in the United States, not all states support PLAR necessarily at the state level. Around a little bit more than half of the states have state level legislation that speaks to the acceptance of and the implementation of PLAR in post-secondary institutions. But certainly, whether it's at the state level here, country level, and perhaps in Jamaica, or at the institutional level, it's important to have for leadership to view PLAR as critical to the institution's mission and vision, and critical for leadership to view it as to identify it in its strategic goals and make it part and parcel of the institution's strategic goal. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise that certainly when you have a PLAR infrastructure at the government level as well as the institutional level, certainly both are very, very important. At the broader level, at the government level, it certainly helps to expand PLA options for all students. It helps to establish consistency in terms of fees and quality standards, performance standards, awarding credit. And it also addresses the challenges of students who transfer from one institution to another. Having supportive PLAR at the state/country level helps institutions to realize economies of scale, so that there can be a common messaging by sharing costs, sharing training, sharing marketing campaigns, and always with consistent messaging, as well as leading to common approaches to tracking and reporting just how students use PLAR to accelerate their degree completion and how what kind of progress is happening in terms of implementation and challenges that institutions are experiencing. So here you will notice an additional part of infrastructure building, a strong infrastructure, is providing a robust support system. And but just before we get there, I just want to draw your attention to the system-wide PLAR task force. And this is a critical component for PLAR infrastructure. And this task force is, as was said, as was indicated by the previous presenters, is basically a community of stakeholders and perhaps PLAR champions who really oversee the process. In terms of Jamaica, at ministry level, certainly there might be representatives from each institution. At the institutional level, they may be representative or stakeholders from the various academic programs. This task force would be responsible for studying. It's an advisory body, but its purpose would be to studying and making recommendations about how to effectuate PLAR in a systematic and manner. It may involve coordinating system-wide communication about PLAR, policy discussions, coordinating the development of policies and procedures, and developing associated data collection. There are things, subcommittees of the task force may, it's recommended, certainly here it is done, for when you are starting out, when you're beginning to consider, discuss the possible implementation of PLAR, to survey the practices and policies of other institutions, of other institutions, other similar institutions, and to get a better grasp of just what they are doing, how you can use what they are doing, identify the challenges that they're experiencing, and then perhaps try to avoid some of those challenges. But certainly surveying the practices and policies. But in addition to that, also develop the policies and procedures, ensuring that PLAR is reflected in the mission, vision, and goals of the institution, and also to oversee just exactly how PLAR should or is implemented. The task force may make recommendations about whether PLAR policies should be system-wide, or whether they or they should be defined by individual institutions. They are basically that arm of the infrastructure that tries to hold, tries to ensure that the entire PLAR program hangs together. So then I talked about providing a robust support system. That's a part of infrastructure building, and one way of doing that is is in the area of resources and services. Resources, and let me just go first of all, actually, to institutional policies and procedures. One very important part of that, the presenters all talked about, the importance of being able to connect the experience of students to uh, um, to college level credit. Here in the States, it would be being able to connect the experiences, work experiences that students had, or non-formal learning that students have had, um, to what's up to college level learning. And so here there are actually there are crosswalks that that operate with at the institutional level and elsewhere, where a student can see just exactly how their experience, how their work experience links to specific coursework, to specific courses. So if they have an interest, if they have experience in managing the wedding planner, for example, have experiences in managing a company, in managing an organization, some component of an organization, then they may want to, and they have an interest in furthering, getting a degree or getting um, uh, formal credit in that area, then they might want to look at business courses, for example. In other words, institutions make clear just exactly what are some of the linkages between coursework and actual experiential learning. That's provided by independent organizations as well as specific specific universities. The American Commission on Education, the American Council on Education, provides that service here in the U.S. as well as other bodies provide that service. So having a crosswalk between developing a crosswalk between experiential learning and approved course equivalents across institutions or across systems is has been identified as a best practice here. Um, okay. And another best practice in the area of institutional policies and procedures is the importance of investing in a high level of collaboration, a high level of collaboration across academic programs. In one of the reports that I reviewed, the P.L.A. coordinators said that there should be broad agreement on awarding credit. So there's collaboration, so that in effect, in order to be able to defend the credit awarded, the decision is not made by a single faculty member, but rather the decision is the decision may be made to award credit to a P.L.A. student, but that decision is approved by additional uh, uh, additional perhaps administrators before that credit is awarded formally and officially. Now, collaboration goes beyond the awarding credit. Collaboration also goes to collaborating with the marketing department that helps to market prior learning assessment, and all of the other departments that are involved with the university. Perhaps collaborating with with uh, with the IT specialists to provide such information on the web for prospective students or those who might have some interest in securing post-secondary education through PLA. So the purpose being that everyone needs to understand the process, and everyone needs to be able to participate in ensuring that PLA is sustained and that works the way it should. Resources and services as another part of the robust support system. There's nothing more frustrating than for students to try to figure all of this out on their own. And so one way of avoiding that here is to consider what's called a one-stop model, where students don't have to try to figure out what needs to be done, but when they go in, they meet with, when they go in, for example, to enroll, students are provided with all their services that they need in one location. So they may, within the same room, they will meet with an advisor who will give them information about how they, what direction perhaps they can go in, how PLA can help them in this respect. They will also have the bursar's office, financial aid, the testing center, and admissions, all in one place to be able to facilitate student access to the information they need in order to enroll. Another additional services is a best practice is investing in an interactive database. Institutions use databases for advising or tracking progress, and it's also used for as we know, for providing course titles, descriptions, number of credits, and how they link up, as I said before, to experiential learning. So it's important for these students, it's been found, to have access to an interactive database that they, as well as their advisors, as well as faculty members, can use in order to facilitate the process for getting credit for prior learning. Dedicated personnel. Ideally, students should have dedicated staff for PLA. That's not always possible due to financial and other concerns. However, it's important to have some personnel who, it's been found in areas where PLA is working well, to have those who have the responsibility of focusing to a great extent on PLAR. In some places, there are prior learning, there are dedicated staff of PLA. They have prior learning specialists, academic advisors, or mentors, or veteran coordinators whose sole purpose is to focus in on making it facilitating the credit, the recognition of prior learning, and to facilitate the movement of the student through the institution. An additional best practice, the last in this area of resources and services, is to consider timeline is very important. It's not often possible to implement everything in one go, but it's been seen that best practice is to implement in stages by academic program. So one way of doing that is to use what's called a readiness guide to identify just which academic programs are in a place where they are ready to implement PLA, and then to implement PLA in stages. And as as PLA succeeds in some academic programs, it will expand. It will expand to others. So again, paying attention to infrastructure building, to the foundation for PLA institutions is an important best practice. I spoke before about the standards for assessing prior learning. I'm just going to look very quickly at these, just to say that these were developed by the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. It's very broad-based. The standards are, but these standards are maybe used as a basis for not only building PLA programs, some of the things to consider. For example, all practitioners involved in the assessment process should pursue and receive adequate training and continuing professional development for the functions they perform. So that really goes to the infrastructure. Number one, credit or competence are awarded only for evidence of learning, not for experience or time spent. So evidence of learning must be provided as opposed to the just having had experience in an area or time spent in that experience. Those things are important, but it's the evidence of the learning that's regarded as most important as a part of this practice. So these are, again, the standards that undergird, that's used internationally, that's highly regarded, and that perhaps may be certainly used as one reference for developing standards for PLA programs. A key part of course, and I've touched on this before, but a key part of successful PLA programs is faculty and staff engagement. I don't think anyone will argue that PLAR legitimacy will improve if you get faculty buy-in and faculty direct involvement. In most cases, faculty are engaged in primarily assessing students' prior learning, but it's been found that best practice extends engagement to additional areas, to student outreach and support activities, to functioning as academic advisors or mentors or advocates, or perhaps developing and teaching courses that are specifically for and helping PLA students through the process. And as I mentioned that, I should just perhaps talk a little bit more. There are one of the best practices is, and we'll probably touch on this again, that there are colleges that have successfully developed perhaps non-credit courses that allows PLA students who are using portfolio-based assessment to establish their learning, the knowledge and skills that they've gained over the years, that they attend these courses and they are guided through the process of developing and completing those portfolio assessments, where students have a chance not just to talk about, explain and describe and document their knowledge and skills, but also to tell their stories, the stories that brought them from where they brought them to a point where they wish to provide some formal recognition of their experience and their learning. So some of the indicators of faculty of faculty and staff engagement is to some of the ways to get this, some of the best practices around this is to build a knowledge base. Not everyone in the system, obviously, will be supportive of PLA from day one. So it will be important to provide information and training on what PLA is, why it's important for students, and how it can in important ways carry out the institution's educational mission. So in using this knowledge, in building this knowledge base, it's important to articulate the benefits of prior learning, assessment, recognition to faculty and staff. Its important to market PLA to internal constituencies, and why it's good for students and why it's good for the institution. It's also important to build a knowledge base by conducting annual transfer credit reviews with relevant faculty so that they are in the loop about how to transfer credit, how transfer credit policies apply to their program. But just generally, it's very important to build a knowledge base. Provide institutional incentives. Very often we find that teachers, that faculty members experience burnout as a result of being just asked to do too much. In addition to their instructional duties, there's just so much more that they're asked to do. Best practice is to incentivize faculty to participate in training, and evaluating portfolios. In many places, in many institutions, the institutions support the department covering expenses. They remunerate faculty for the additional activities that they're engaged in. Or one very important thing is that they certainly integrate the additional expectations of faculty into their promotion and tenure process. So those are some ways, some best practices for providing institutional incentives. Finally, develop faculty training. It's been found that training sessions led by internal and external experts really contribute to increasing faculty understanding of PLA policies and practices, and as well the value for students and the institution. So that in addition to, well, we have talked about covering training expenses before, but it certainly as well expanding training options for faculty, incorporating workshops and seminars and one-on-one conversations, and leaning on internal PLA specialists for faculty development. Another way of training, of course, is to tour training or educational facilities. Arrange for faculty to tour military or corporate training and education facilities to increase their understanding of the academic rigor behind prior or experiential learning. So develop faculty training. Just to give you a sense, I think we all have an innate understanding of just how much is involved in the tasks, in the PLA-related tasks. But certainly here we see that all of the possible um, all of the possible methods of assessing prior learning here, and just what has to occur in order to get these things done. We just find that there is a more personnel than one would just originally think that are involved in addressing those tasks. For example, student advising, we find that student advising is involved, student advising, which is may be carried out by faculties or a faculty member, or may be carried out by staff person who's specifically there dedicated to providing student in a student advisory capacity, that they're involved in the business of institutional transcripts, the advising regarding training, advising regarding standardized examinations that might provide prior learning credit, professional learning and challenge exams, and all of these areas that student advising is required. Credit acceptance, that's often, well, let's just move to faculty assessors. That here it is particularly related to challenge exams and individual portfolios, but one would argue that that it's expanded. It may be expanded from to other areas as well. To, for example, professional learning. For example, that faculty assessors may be required, may be needed in those areas as well. So this is to provide an idea of the kinds of a sense of the tasks, the various types of methods of assessing prior learning, and the tasks that are involved in getting that done. Okay, best practice number 4 is student and community outreach. It's critical. In order for PLA to thrive, to be successful, it's critical that institutions reach out to students as well as the community. So it's important to connect students with consistent, accurate, and timely information with robust PLAR outreach. Now here, certainly in the States, technology is an important tool for disseminating information, as well as to process PLA requests, and awarding and credentialing. It's just integral to the entire program. So successful PLARs here in the States rely heavily on technology to make information about credit for prior learning available to students, and available to students is what we're focusing on here. So some ways to get that done is really to improve web presence and or email campaigns. The campaign using technology to identify students, to communicate with students, and to connect them with the kinds of information that they need. And even perhaps equally important is to pursue community-based outreach. And this means going out to the community, going out to companies, going out to corporations, going out to training facilities, where the students are, where adult students are, where the in order to identify and identify those who may be interested in PLA, as well as to make those connections to in order to draw them into the program. But not only that, just to find out just to be able to collaborate with say, the local military personnel, to collaborate with corporations about how together institutions can partner with local corporations in terms of enhancing the skills and abilities, or recognizing the skills and abilities of their employees or of their personnel in a formal way. Initiating early student engagement is another way of, and I've referred to this before, certainly structuring and facilitating early opportunities for students to interact with staff and faculty advisors, and to keep those relationships with staff and advisors going throughout the students' journey, educational journey at the institution. And one of the things that really make a big difference is when a student comes in, when a student inquires, when an individual inquires about PLA opportunities, that they are responded to immediately. They're able to meet with an individual who will take them through the process, at least, and certainly secure. Perhaps one of the first ways that they will get information is via what's available on the web, the website of an institution. But to get information there that will then lead them to personnel that will provide them with the support that they need. Finally, providing student support is another best practice, so that once institutions reach out to students, reach out to the community, it's important to support these students, and I really talked about that to some degree already, to support that student throughout their journey, to enhance the student's ability to earn credit and to complete their program. So then to provide early and ongoing mentoring for students, to explore curricular adaptation. It may be necessary to adjust. Some schools actually modify their curriculum to include for example, include in-person or online courses, or just to adjust the curriculum itself in order to facilitate students who are interested in prior learning. As I indicated earlier in my presentation, there are institutions that have developed in-person educational planning courses, that they mandate all students take these courses that will help them through the process, especially if they are using portfolio-based assessments to get the PLA, the credit for prior learning that they are seeking. Finally, to centralize a credit for prior learning offices or centers. Some institutions successfully consolidate some or all of their administrative functions and create a centralized location on campus. Actually, I believe to a great degree in some smaller states, there is some centralization that happens at the state level as well. So where you're not able to have a specific prior learning office, where they're not able to have a specific prior learning office, there are PLAR specific staff in relevant offices. For example, in the testing and career centers, there may be staff there. The more successful programs have staff there that help interested students understand what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. So to centralize prior learning activities wherever possible on campus. in institutions. So at the end here, I have a roadmap for system-wide policy that was developed by the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. And this is another way of going, way of going through developing the policy and implementing PLA policy, as well as the references at the end. So with that, those are the best practices, highlights of best practices that are available, that are provided here in the U.S. And I hope it's been helpful to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Norma Sinclair. Indeed, your presentation has been very helpful as we seek to implement PLAR and PLAR best practices here in Jamaica across institutions. You mentioned some general best practices, speedier graduation, recognizing learning outside of the formal system, increased student persistence, career acceleration, credit transfers, increased degree completion. You also mentioned some key areas for implementation: infrastructure building, standards, faculty staff engagement, students and community outreach, as well as student support. And one of the things that certainly stands out in my mind is this idea that leadership is such a critical component of infrastructure building, as well as the fact that resources are necessary. So I'd like you to comment on something that Verica Bennett also posed as you spoke about infrastructure building. Verica Bennett in the chat, she says, is there representation on this PLAR task force outside of the traditional tertiary level institution? So you mentioned about the importance of having a task force. Is it just for the tertiary level institution, or is it supposed to be widespread? Who are some of the other stakeholders that can be considered?
Yes, well, it's certainly up to, for example, if we're talking at the institutional level, it's certainly up to the institution, but they are a committee of advisors who are stakeholders. They do not necessarily have to be only stakeholders within the tertiary environment. They may include members of the corporate community. They may include students. As I said, one of the things that's important to include is to think about, certainly, is champions of PLAR, individuals, personnel who strongly support PLAR. So yes, it does not necessarily have to be restricted to it certainly won't be restricted to the tertiary level, but stakeholders in the process.
Okay, thank you so much. And Dr. Sinclair is saying these best practices are very specific and intentional. Indeed, they are. And I know that they are indeed very useful and relevant to our institutions in Jamaica that are seeking to implement and to improve on what they have. So thank you so much, Dr. Sinclair. I'm just going to invite all our presenters back as we ask one or two general questions that are applicable to all presenters. So I'm going to invite, hopefully you're all still with us. Thank you so much.
Right now.
All right, thank you. And so this one is particularly for Professor Barrett, but I want our other presenters to comment as well. It says that you spoke about the resistance to PLAR. And by the way, we ran a poll while the presentation was going on. I hope I haven't lost my poll results, but I know if I have, Matthew will chip in and help me. I found it. All right, so we ran a poll while, based on your presentation, Professor Barrett. Why do some HEIs resist PLAR? And 50% of the respondents said it's because of insufficient understanding of PLAR. 36% said it's because of conscious or unconscious bias, and 9% said it's because of internal lack of internal systems. And we know as well, Dr. Sinclair, that you mentioned the importance of that. So, Professor Barrett, is there a systematic approach that can be taken to pursue and combat this particular challenge? And I want you to comment on that as well, Dr. Sinclair.
Okay, excellent. I'm happy to hear that that poll was done. And the findings are cover all the spectrum of reasons. And I think the question you ask is what can be done. And exactly things like this, seminar, symposium like this, are useful in that, and useful not just to give us, not just to tell us what we are to do, that this can be done and that, but like I did now, was to put it in a broader framework to cause us to see the contribution to the development of our country, and that it goes beyond just taking in some older people into the system, or or because sometimes that's how we look at it. Oh, we don't need to do that, and such and such. But also, the fact is that it takes quite a bit of work. It takes a bit of work. I reflect on my own self, and I like to be self-reflective, that I am passionate about PLAR, but when I'm at my desk and I'm engaged in other things, and I get something from the PLAR office, can you help us to assess and to see if this one fits in? That's a lot of time. And so I say, even though I'm so passionate, that becomes a challenge for me. So this matter of having the staff that can support you, like my PLAR office needs more staff to be able to support her in carrying out this kind of thing. But I believe training, I believe capacity building with knowledge and information on the benefits of PLAR, because this is sometimes PLAR is just said to us in terms of like more students in the university. That's not what it is about. It's so much more. So I believe this thing about lack of understanding is very, very important. It is true, and it is widespread. But I also believe, because I have spoken with persons, because it was a journey for me as well. So it's because I'm a believer doesn't mean that I was always a believer in the process. The biases you have concerning what you value in higher education. And so here it is here. So I'm an adult specialist. That's what my master's is in. That's what my PhD is in. And so I had to go through a process of understanding that this is one approach that will get adults to upgrade themselves. So it really is going to take things like you are doing. So this is excellent. But it's not just in a forum that I'm going to have to come, and only some of us can come. It has to be in a forum that's more open for people to have dialogue within institutions and in communities. In communities, we tend to have a lot of things locked up in institutions because we think formal. Going in town hall meetings, going in communities and talking about it, going in workspaces, talking about it. Not just that work employers can do it in their offices, but the link between them and the higher education institutions. And an entity like JTEC is well positioned to help us in that regard.
Thank you so much, Professor Barrett, and we certainly will continue the thrust. I'm going to ask Dr. Sinclair, you mentioned some very excellent points in your presentation that can help with what we were looking at, a systematic approach to really increase the buy-in and acceptance. Do you have any quick comment on that?
Yes, I certainly do. I think it's as I said before, and as the response and the respondents to your survey indicated, that there is really important that we don't have all the buy-in that you should have from staff and faculty, and that you need to have that. in order for PLAR to work and to thrive. And the way one does it is that you really, the best practices suggest it's important to recognize the basis for the lack of, for the concern. For example, it's important to have conversations. It's important to have staff and faculty as part of that advisory body. It's important to have them involved in every level. It's important to have to market the program for what it does for the institution, for students, for faculty and staff. How everybody benefits from that program. So those are some of the things that might be done in addition to what I said before, in order to reduce some of the concerns about PLAR.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to throw out a question coming out of that too. In terms of institutions that take a traditional approach and they want their ratings to be high on the Times Higher Education list, and they may say, oh, PLAR may hold me back. What would you say to them, Azra? What would you say to them, Professor Barrett? The ratings of my institution may go down if I'm sitting here listening to stories, helping people to document them and looking at ways to help them. That's not how I'm going to get my institution in the rated highly. What do you say to an institution that says that?
I think Professor Barrett.
Okay, I will get started. That is the challenge that higher education institutions face, especially within this context. What is our goal? What is our objective? What is our role in society? Is it to attain some score on some rates that wasn't even developed by us? That I am in sessions all through the pandemic, and people out of those entities are also. I'm part of the higher education, one of the forum, and I listened to a very dynamic presentation from a well-respected president of, don't ask for the name of the college, university, no, I have it written down. People have him everywhere. And one of the things he says, this archaic, he described it, way of ranking universities. We buy into it. And so our function as building our societies becomes sidelined by building our empires. I feel very strongly about those kinds of things. I want my institution to do very well. I want UTEC to be known as the leading institution for all the areas we do. But I do not want UTEC to compromise its commitment as a national university to its people to look for ranking. I am not one of those, and I believe that interferes with our usefulness to our societies. And I believe that that's what we ought to be about, usefulness to your society. So often we start things with a nice vision, and maybe we didn't even know what the vision was because it was long before us. We come into it and we just put down the vision pathway because we get caught up. It's like you set a goal to do this for your family, and you start on the way, and by the time you start make the money, you forget that the goal was to do this and that for my family. You get caught up with making more, and so we get sidetracked. So the short answer is, we need to know what our mission is, what our vision is, and what our purpose is. We say higher education is a social good. Well, if it is, then let us function as it is.
Thank you so much. So it's so critical to understand what our goal is and what is it that we want to achieve. Are we seeking to serve people, or are we serving ourselves? Are we seeking to look good, or are we seeking to make others look good? Azra, you want to comment on that?
I could comment quickly because I'm sorry, but I have to take my daughter to the doctor now.
No,
So
that's
I'm just
fine.
going to say
That's
a quick,
fine. We're wrapping up.
yeah. Um, so in terms of what Professor Barrett said, yes, I agree totally and wholeheartedly. And I think the story has to be told differently now. We can't go back 15, 20 years again, as I said in my presentation. If we go to that basis and we go to this ranking and ranking, we're going to go back to the same thing again. And we're going to have the same conversation, these same slides up 10 years from now, parity of esteem again. And we'll be doing the same thing again. So we need to stop altogether and say, this is the new narrative. This is the new stance we take. This is the way going forward. This is going to insulate us. This is going to help us. This is for the national good of all my people in Jamaica and the diaspora. And that's it. We really need to stop this as the local artists say this ranking thing. You know, what is the rank? What is the colloquial rank we want, or do we want to be ranked? Are we ranking ourselves for ourselves, or are we being allowed to be ranked? And that's a big thing, eh? That's a big thing. I mean, I'm a UWI graduate, and I'm very proud of it. Very proud of the alumni I'm of. I'm also a product of many other institutions where I did skilled certifications. For example, I did hair dressing, I did bread, cakes, and pastry. I did all of those things, and they stood me in good stead when I had to cut my daughter's hair and my hair during the pandemic as well. So you see, but yes, it was lovely being on this panel. Noda, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone. And I do hope much fruit is born from these conversations. All right, but I must leave to take my daughter to the doctor. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And as we wrap up, I'm just going to ask Dr. Sinclair and Professor Barrett just to give your final words in a nutshell on this topic, best practices and innovative solutions. Just your final comment as we go, your message as we wrap up today's proceedings.
Yes, I guess I'll just start and just say, it's I just again go back to the importance of organizational culture, and just the culture in general, how important that leadership is, and how important it is to be aware of the context that you're in, the cultural context that you're in. So while you can borrow, it's important to look at best practices from around the world, but it's important to look to see how relevant it is to the culture that you're bringing it into. But don't negate these best practices. It's important. No point in reinventing the wheel. Look to see what's available and make the adjustments necessary that are culturally relevant.
Absolutely. It is absolutely necessary that we benchmark other nations, but then we must make the adjustments that are culturally relevant. Thank you so much for that. Professor Barrett?
Right. I'm happy I'm able to say again, but I was particularly struck by the matter of the organizational culture, because that's the one phrase that captures really the matter about the bias, or the matter about the why we resist. It really is around the organizational culture. So thanks for reminding me about that, Dr. Sinclair. And I would just say, if we lock into a path that says we are going to give access to our adult learners, we are going to increase the number of engaged citizens. And I think somebody referenced it this morning. I am troubled, and some other persons are troubled, by the shift that has taken place in terms of the extended high school. And we made that shift without the attending to some other matters, and how that will affect enrollment in, for example, my institution, UTEC, that takes in people after fifth form, and then not preparing the system, we'll say the P.L.A.R kind of approach. So it's like we are picking, and we are doing all sorts of things, and that comprehensive whole is not there. So that's something that we fall short on, and we have to pay attention to it. But in light of the P.L.A.R, I just ask that I thank you, JTEC, for giving leadership in this. Of course, some institutions were ahead in their individual doing, but giving leadership to pulling it together. That is important, to put it in the front. And I know you have some work to do with the workplace, and I believe that will help as well. Let's start where we can. Let's do it well. And those who like to jump on will jump on.
Thank you so much. And of course, there is so much ahead. Thanks to all participants today. Vincent Peter King here said it well. He said, thanks to all of our presenters and JTEC for this symposium, a most rewarding, profitable, and engaging experience. An excellent platform for supporting PLAR forward planning in our institution. All right. He's asked for an electronic certificate, and we're certainly going to ensure that that is made available for our participants today, because we've been talking about micro-credentials and we've been talking about badging and supporting PLAR with all of that. And I must tell you that there is a whole MOOC coming out. We'll hear more about that as time progresses, and we're going to ensure that within each institution, there is at least one person who is appropriately trained to administer PLAR. We'll be supporting you. Very soon, we'll be publishing the standards and guidelines for institutions to develop their policy, as we stated earlier. Thank you so much, Professor Barrett, Dr. Sinclair, and of course, Mrs. Nathum Khan. She had to leave earlier. Thank you all, and thanks for all participants for everything that you've been contributing to this discourse today. All the best. Continue to share this presentation with others who are not able to tune in. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good day, I'm Gabrielle Thompson with an item of interest just in. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, JTEC, is reporting that persons who have learned skills and competencies through experience are now able to get qualified. This is done through the Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition (PLAR) component of the Commission's National Qualification Framework of Jamaica, NQFJ. The PLAR identifies, documents, and assesses prior learning. Getting qualified through PLAR is for persons who have gained experience in various jobs and volunteer activities through a hobby, interests, independent study, or through training courses. Assessing prior learning takes into consideration your portfolio, results of a challenge exam, and your ability to demonstrate your skills. The benefits of this component of the NQFJ include eliminating learning duplication. It increases self-confidence in learners, validates learning through work and life experience, identifies areas that require further study, and encourages learners to pursue further communication. JTEC says people who fall in these categories are capable of getting hired because they can actively demonstrate their skills through the portfolio of work they have developed. Stay tuned for more items of interest.
So go call mommy about this. So good. Hi, mommy. Were you watching TV? Yeah, breaking news just came in to say that you can get certified based on your experiences, skills, and portfolio. You remember when you were thinking about getting certified in domestic work? Yeah, well, you can contact JTEC because you've been doing this for a very long time. All you have to do is visit their website at www.jtec.gov.jm, or you can call them at 876-977-5115.